one fund, on point for today, the expert to talk about it. This is the ETF of the week. Yes, welcome to the ETF of the week, where we examine trending, new, newsworthy, unique, and intriguing exchange-traded funds with Todd Rosenbluth, the head of research at VettaFi. And at VettaFi.com, you will find all the tools you need and the research that can help you become a better, smarter, savvier investor in ETFs. Todd Rosenbluth, it's great to chat with you again.
Excited to be with you, Chuck.
Your ETF of the week is
the Vanguard Total International Bond ETF, BNDX.
The Vanguard Total International Bond ETF, BNDX. Okay, international bonds now. Why this fund in this market?
Yeah, well, the fund is doing quite well. It's actually outperforming the U.S. version, the Vanguard Total U.S. Bond ETF, BND, in the past year, as well as thus far in 2024. We find that many advisors, many investors have international equity exposure to round out and provide diversification, but their fixed income exposure, the bonds inside the portfolio, tend to be tracking the U.S. aggregate bond index, investment grade corporates and U.S. treasuries, and they're leaving out a good part of the benefits of diversification through fixed income. Vanguard offers a great fund. It's index-based, it's low cost, it's well diversified. It's exactly what many investors realize their need, but haven't really thought much about it till now.
Okay, but we're still in an environment where we are waiting for a rate cut and we're watching what's happening around the world. What happens with this pick? Like, is this a pick saying ride the wave and wait for the cuts to happen? Or is this an allocation choice? Yes, you need that international exposure, so go get it and hang on to it.
So most of the time that I'm on, I offer a more tactical, short-term oriented, or even a small slice of a portfolio. This ETF, BNDX, can sit within the core of your allocation, but in a similar manner that you might with international equity. So most people have a 60-40 or a 70-30 with equity versus fixed income, and more than 2/3, probably 3/4 of that equity or equity exposure is to the US, and a slice of that is to international equity. We think that's appropriate to do for fixed income also. So to have BND, which is the US version of Vanguard's product, paired with BNDX, the international version, and you get the benefits of geographic diversification. So yes, we're watching the US Fed. It's not clear if they're going to cut this year and how much, but BNDX is going to be impacted by what's happening in Europe, in Asia, and even in emerging markets. This is total international, so you're getting some emerging market exposure. All of this in one ETF for a very low fee, and it's yielding 3%. So you are getting paid for that international exposure using the Vanguard product.
Let's talk a little bit about that allocation, because one of the things I'm always asking is, how does something fit into the portfolio? How does it play with others? So you're clearly saying, first, get your US bond exposure. Then if you don't have the international exposure, use a tool like this one, BNDX, to get that. But if somebody has their domestic exposure, what kind of balance are you looking for? Like, is this 10% of your bond allocation, or is this you split your bond allocation domestically and internationally? What's the allocation that you're going to tend to favor?
Yeah, so I'm going to defer to individual investors to work with their advisor to make sure they understand the risk tolerance. But international investing is riskier than the U.S. investing. There tends to be often more volatility, especially BNDX has a emerging market component. And even though this ETF, BNDX, is currency hedged, so you're not taking on that same level of potential risk or potential reward based on the euro, the yen, or whatever currency you want to think of relative to the US dollar, it's important to have an allocation that makes sense. So I'm not advocating for 50-50. Typically, people have more money in US-based investments than international investments for a home bias and because that's the market that they best understand. But having some allocation to international bonds probably makes sense. Vanguard, being a leading provider of not only ETFs, but fixed income ETFs, is a logical partner to consider. And this is a low cost product. So you're going to be able to put most of the money to work with a Vanguard ETF instead of paying a high management fee. And that's just what people should be hoping for with a broad asset allocation product.
Now, this is a total bond market ETF. And total, when you're talking international, includes emerging markets and the rest. And there are some folks who are uncomfortable being in those parts of the world right now. So do you worry at all about that? Or is this a way to kind of get over that discomfort without going, hey, let me go get an emerging markets bond fund as well?
So I think the latter. I think people who want to have broad exposure should be aware of how much exposure is to different regions and different geographies, and they should do their homework. And you can find this information on our ETF database website. I'm not looking at it at the moment, but I believe the emerging market exposure is around 10 to 15% of this portfolio. So it is the minority, but there is exposure to emerging countries and the bonds that are issued. And you get a combination of sovereign bonds, though, again, being issued by the government, as well as corporate bonds. So that's the total part, or that's part of the total part. You're getting broader market exposure. Geographically, you're getting broader fixed income exposure across some of the bond sectors. And this tends to be investment grade oriented bonds. So AA, single A rated bonds are primarily what you'd find within this portfolio, and you get the benefits of diversification. If you want to dedicate exposure to emerging markets with fixed income, there are products that are available from some of the leading providers. This is going to have a small slice towards emerging markets, but most of it's going to be in developed Europe and Japan, for example.
I think we are remiss if we talk about a Vanguard fund and we don't talk about expenses, because of course they are known for being low cost leaders. I know the expense ratio on this one is 7 basis points, 0.07%. Is that not that expenses have to be a selling point, but since we know that returns are not guaranteed and expenses are, is that the other side here that, hey, if you're going to go get international bond exposure, get it as cheaply as you can? There's not much that's going to be cheaper than this fund.
So you certainly want to be aware of the expense ratio. And I find that expense ratios for broad asset allocation products are roughly the same from some of the leading providers, iShares, Vanguard, State Street, among others. And so this is quite cheap in general. And it certainly is cheaper than if you were to get an actively managed mutual fund to get exposure to international bonds. The Vanguard ETF is quite cheap. But it's important to know what's inside and understand this is currency hedged. Some of the other products are not. This includes emerging markets. Some of the other products don't have that. Make sure you understand what you're getting inside the portfolio, not just what BNDX costs.
And if you are looking for that international diversification, well, BNDX, the ETF of the week, the Vanguard Total International Bond ETF, something you might want to be looking at. Todd, great stuff as always. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you again next week.
Sounds great, Chuck.
The ETF of the week is a joint production of VettaFi and Moneylife with Chuck Jaffe. And yeah, that's me. And you can learn all about my hour-long weekday podcast by going to moneylifeshow.com or by searching wherever you find great podcasts. Now, if you're searching for great information on exchange-traded funds, make sure you check out VettaFi.com, because they have that great information and a full suite of tools that's going to help you be a better investor in ETFs. They're on Twitter or X at Vetta_Fi. Todd Rosenbluth, their head of research, my guest, he's on Twitter too. He is at Todd Rosenbluth. The ETF of the week is here for you every Thursday. Make sure you don't miss an episode by following along on your favorite podcast app. We'd love to have you here every week. And until next week, happy investing, everybody.